Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our seventh wine tasting event for our clients at Presilium Private Wealth. We are grateful to be here with all of you. If you were invited to this event, then you are very important to us. Our life's work is to ensure that all of you reach your financial goals. Every decision we make is made with your success in mind and drives us each and every day. Thank you. Tonight is also a celebration. At the start of this year, we gave you 3 reasons that we were optimistic about 2023. And as we approach year end, it has been a tremendous year. And because of your faith in us, you have all had excellent results. As usual, we remain ready to take advantage of whatever the market and the world gives us next, actively working on your behalf each and every day. Now, I don't want to stand in the way any longer of 3 amazing bottles of wine and our fantastic sommelier. Please let me introduce my good friend, Brandon of Vin-Decision, who is going to guide us through a tasting of 3 different but amazing wines. We are also looking forward to discovering how to read a wine list like an expert during our event tonight. Brandon, welcome back. We are thrilled to have you with us again.
My name is Brandon Borcoman, and I essentially do this for a living. Well, I at least spend part of my life in wine. The other part, I teach at a university, but I love teaching. I grew up with wine. At least my formative New York City years were all in wine. So I've been in New York City and based in New York City for about 12, 13 years. And in New York City, the wine scene is wild. I'm from California originally. And of course, there's Napa on the West Coast. There's Oregon too. There's a lot of wine stuff happening in California, but nowhere in my experience does a culture, a community take wine as seriously as they do in New York City. So when I first moved here, I saw the allure of people treating wine like a lifestyle. And I caught the wine bug. I was so intrigued by the seemingly infinite amount of complexity and nuance that wine offered. And so I got sucked into that world. I was a wine director at a restaurant called Charlie Bird, which is still in New York City. But I started my own company as COVID began. And so I've done about 500 to, I lost count, maybe 600 tastings at this point. And I really love connecting to people via wine, and especially through some of the best producers and the most relevant regions of the world. So know that we did spend a fair amount of time sourcing the correct bottles for you, sourcing the right producers, because that's a major thing. You know, you could just blindly pick some Spanish wine, some Italian wine, and some French wine, but doesn't mean those wines are necessarily going to be good. Hopefully they are, but we spent a lot of time doing that. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit through these wines. So if they're not all open, that's okay. If you've already been drinking, even better. That's the point. We are going to start with the white wine, and then we're going to get into the Burgundy, and then we're going to finish at the end with Barolo. You can mix up that order as you wish. I do recommend no matter starting with the white wine because it's going to be a nice palate cleanser. But I think this trifecta is really informative, especially when we translate it to your own wine world knowledge, whether it be a restaurant wine list, which we're actually going to look at tonight. And I'm going to give you some tips of how to dissect it and how to get through it. Or if it's just at your kind of local wine shop, a lot of this information is going to be transferable in either situation. So before we get going, cheers to all of you. I will make my glass visible so it doesn't disappear. Cheers to all of you. Know that when you're tasting wine, the most important thing is to smell the wine. So a lot of us might just kind of have that knee-jerk reaction of, you know, cracking a bottle, pouring it in the glass and taking a sip. I would say 75 to 80% of the tasting experience is actually smelling. And you could kind of test this hypothesis out by utilizing cheese, plugging your nose when you eat cheese. really any sort of aromatic or maybe kind of like funkalicious item. And you're going to realize that that cheese is not as expressive. It's not as interesting. It's not as intriguing. It's maybe a little bit bland if you like were to plug your nose and taste that cheese. So that your olfactory is doing a lot of work with wine. So let it. That's why we swirl wine to look, of course, like a fancy human being. But also, we are letting this wine open up by doing this. So when we smell it, it's going to be more evolved. It's going to be more developed. More things are going to be happening. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So always give it a chance. Of course, if you're not trying to taste the wine, it's one of those wines that your token neighbor brings that's never good wine. You want to make that thing as cold as humanly possible and no need to smell it. You can just kind of get from point A to point B, which is point buzzed, and that's all you got to do. But if you want to enjoy the wine, you got to smell it. So give yourself time to do that. So we are starting with this white wine in Spain. For a lot of different reasons. I do want to make, before I get too far ahead of myself, I do want to make it known that you are very welcome to ask questions along the way. We're happy to field them. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go along. I'm going to share different images, different maps, different ways of immersing you in this wine world. So you can just follow along, but you can send a few questions too if you'd like. So we are in Spain. So I'm going to show you a map of Spain just in case you need a refresher. Spain is a place that has really had a renaissance of sorts over the last 10 or 15 years. When I first got into the wine industry, Spain was certainly knowable, and people would kind of know about Rioja. People might know about Ribera del Duero. They might have 2 or 3 places that they're like, yeah, that's Spain. And some of those places started making wines that kind of tasted like they could be from anywhere. It was just like a big, bold, kind of hyper extracted wine, maybe a lot of tannins there. And when you drank it, maybe it was good, especially like with a steak or roasted meat. But sometimes you could also be like, this could be from anywhere. Who knows? That has all changed tremendously over the last 10 or 15 years. And now a lot of these places, even if they're the same places we used to know, are focusing more on this mineral bent, this more delicate, more finesse-driven emphasis on a lot of these kind of subtler tones. And so now we're finding Spain in a really interesting place. No longer is it one of these places that like, oh, it's kind of a dime a dozen. No, every single region is starting to showcase and show off its own personality and its own identity. And when it does that, it makes a wine that is memorable. When you drink a wine from Spain, often today at least, you find that, wow, that doesn't really taste like other places in the world to me. And that's what they're doing really well. And so there's a few reasons for that. Probably the biggest reason is not only the overall kind of wine population has become a little bit more intelligent, a little bit more willing to adventure. That's one thing. And I mean intelligent just in like they have more active knowledge of what's going on in the world and in these places. But also the youth is taking over. The generation is now in their kind of, they've become the youngest generation, now taking over, now kind of reaching that young adulthood. And it's passing, the power is passing on to them. And these are the wines that excite them. So to give you a quick lay of the land, Madrid's here. If you've ever flown to Spain, maybe you've landed in Madrid. You're going to find Barcelona over here. You'll see on the coast. So those are maybe your reference points. Rioja is a massively well-known area, and Rioja continues to make great wines. We're going to kind of go back to Rioja when we get to the wine list. But by and large, a lot of the crazy wines, in my opinion, a lot of the value-driven wines too, are coming from right above Portugal in this place called Galicia. Galicia is where Albarino is from. A lot of people know what Albarino is. It's on a lot of wine lists. But you can see here, what I love about this map, you can see how close and how much influence the ocean has on this overall region. And that's a big thing. So when you smell this wine, you probably smell a lot of things. We all smell different things, I'm sure. But one thing that I always smell on a well-made on a well-made Albarino, and especially on a wine that comes from Galicia, I smell the ocean. I smell this kind of salty seashell, kind of briny nature to the wine, which is always something that allures me. It's always something that I love starting the meal off with, especially if there's raw seafood on the table. This is a perfect complement to that. And it's also something that sort of quenches your thirst, because there is this active acidity in it. Like watch when you take a sip, your cheeks will pucker. When that happens, it means that that acidity is kicking in, but it also is making your palate interested and wanting the next sip. And so you want a wine like that, especially in the beginning. And so all of these things combine to make Galicia a place that is rather exciting. There's a lot of notes here. There's a lot of layers of kind of minerality mixed with that fruit. And so it's not just a one-dimensional wine. And more you'll see that Albarino continues to do this in a very kind of perplexing way, because while Spain is having this renaissance, or maybe kind of just had it, the wine prices aren't very high. And so you could be drinking very well. Let's say, you buy a bottle at a restaurant for like 85 or 90 bucks, and we'll talk about restaurant pricing. You can buy that bottle for 85 or 90 bucks, but it actually drinks like a wine from somewhere else in the world that's better known, that's closer to like 200 bucks, 250 bucks. And so there's so much quality that happens here. It's just not everyone's eyes are on this region. And so that's when you can pull in and drink very well. What I like to say to my clients is you can drink nicer. So this is a place that needs to be on your map, on your radar. It needs to be something that you should actively kind of seek out and understand if this wine speaks to you. Also know that wine is different for everyone. You're allowed to like what you like. The older I get, the more, I guess, informed I get, maybe too. Hopefully that's happening. The less picky, the less fussy I become about wine. When I was that kind of young gun, that young sommelier who had to show everyone like that I could do it, that I can kind of roll with the best, the top sommeliers of the world, I would only drink, these specific regions, because this is what a wine collector, a wine, connoisseur drinks. No, I don't do that anymore. Not only can I not afford it, and my fiance will look through my checking account and understand what is allocated to wine, but I don't actually think that's the best way to drink wine. There's times when we can do that, and we can do that well, and it's really fun. But other times, the wines that move me are the wines that exceed expectations. The wines that are also wholly unique and singular in their presence. Those are the wines that really shake me and make me pay attention. Because those other wines, those fancy wines, can be really nice and special, but they're actually not that hard to find. You can kind of go on the internet and find, this $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $10,000 bottle of wine with relative ease, if you know what you're looking for. The hard wines that are out there to find are the wines kind of like this, that really showcase the possibility of a vineyard being right next to the ocean, and translating that in the glass in this sort of wild way, because it doesn't translate like that, like from A to B. The vineyard's next to the ocean, therefore you taste the ocean. The science isn't that clear. Sometimes, vineyards are right next to the water, and so water actually gets in the vineyards. Sometimes that happens, but it's all of this geological makeup. It's all these different kind of natural factors that come together that create this wine. And that's the exciting part. I want to give you a moment to think about what you think about this wine, to kind of internalize it. I hope you like it, but make your own decision. That's important. If I were to go to a restaurant and I wanted to order wine like this, what are the words that I would use? This is important, because you don't want to use words that are confusing. You also don't want to use words that maybe you don't have a very good command on. Like everyone, when I was on the floor, just about every red wine a person would order, they would say, I would like a dry red wine. I'm like, guess how much that helps me? Because Pinot Noir is dry, Cabernet is oftentimes dry too. So that word doesn't really help me too much. If someone came in though and said, you know what, I like wines that tend to be near the ocean or tend to grow up near the ocean that are kind of salty or saline and more mineral than fruity. That's a pretty concise phrase altogether. 1.5, 2 sentences, maybe one run-on sentence. I know exactly what that person wants. I can go in the cellar and find something for them, or I can just, understand where they exist on the list price point wise and point it out. Everyone's happy. So find the language that you're most comfortable with. And it's your words. Sometimes it helps just kind of typing it into your notes on your iPhone, or just writing it down real quick, wherever you write things down. That language can take you very far, because now you've just eliminated a whole bunch of possibilities within, a minute or two. And you don't have to keep going back and forth and understanding what, the sommelier thinks you mean, because some sommeliers just aren't that nice. They're a little bit conceited at times. And so to get around that, or to communicate efficiently, use your own language and lean into that. I think it's a good idea. If you've had Albarino before, this is probably no surprise, but in my opinion, it's always a surprise when it's made really well. And what I love about this is there's so much happening on that fruit to mineral, almost this kind of opposition that finds a balance. It's kind of mind-boggling. And I love smelling that. It's one of my favorite wines to smell on the regular. That nose is so evocative. As you're kind of finishing that sip, we can always come back to it. Start pouring your Burgundy bottle, which for almost all of you is going to say Le Doix, and that ends with an X. So it looks like Le Doix, but it is Le Doix. Pour that Le Doix and get it kind of moving in your glass. When I used to kind of practice wine, and it is a practice, oftentimes in the restaurant, I taste over 100 wines a night, sometimes more, because you have 350, 400 people coming in one night, and there's only 2 sommeliers. You're gonna like move. But one of my mentors won the world's best sommelier competition. That's a real competition. He won it in 2016 in Argentina. And so to help him prepare for that, we did a lot of blind wine tasting. So blind wine is generally when someone, aside from you, pours a wine in a glass, and you have to figure out what it is without knowing anything except for the color, obviously. When we did that, and why we did that, is really to understand a wine without all of its superficialities, without its label, without the artwork, without the aesthetic pleasure that they try to make the outside at least appeal to. We would try to figure out what the wine was at its core, and him at a competitive level. Whenever it came to Albarino, though, it was one of those things where like, yes, I got an easy one, especially when it's made well, because you know exactly what you can smell everything about this wine and where it comes from in that glass, which is so exciting. Blind wine tasting, if you've never done it, it is a total psychological game. It's fun, but it is very hard. Like you trick yourself in and out, go back and forth. It's tough. It's fun in a group, but we used to do that a lot. And we learned a lot, of course. All right, so we are going to Le Doix, which is Burgundy. You should likely see that this wine is almost kind of translucent. It does have a kind of like a darker robe, like dark ruby. So it's not totally light, but it is pretty transparent if you were to hold it against like a white piece of paper, a white napkin, etc. And that's what you expect for Burgundy. You expect a wine that is pretty light on its feet, pretty lithe, pretty translucent. We are, of course, in France. And when we are in Burgundy, especially, and it's a red wine, we are in Pinot Noir territory. If it were a white wine, we'd be in Chardonnay territory. But by and large, in this kind of little strip in almost the middle of France, called Burgundy, you find really only two grapes. There's more, but two grapes, 98%, 98.5% of all of Burgundy is made up of these two grapes. And you can see it's not a massive swath of land. It doesn't take you very long as you're going through each vineyard, each village. It's quick. You can bike through it. What is interesting, though, despite that kind of small amount of land, there are so many possibilities of making just Pinot Noir or Chardonnay. And that's what they emphasize in this place. They are obsessed with this idea of very small differences that make the wine as unique as it is. So that is to say, if you were at the top of Burgundy and you're drinking Pinot Noir, and then let's say you travel to the bottom, which in a car is less than an hour, and you drink wine from the same exact producer. You actually drink Pinot Noir also, made exactly the same way. Let's say it's made in the same exact cellar. You'll find that these wines are tremendously different. And that is exactly what they want you to see, because they believe in this idea that below the ground, the soil, everything that's layered on top of there, they think that is the most important thing that you could ever imagine in wine. That is the single source of a wine's identity, is this earth, this dirt, this soil, this terroir, this natural environment. So Burgundy takes this to an nth degree. And that's why a lot of people can be A, intimidated by Burgundy, but B, obsessed with Burgundy. That's what I essentially found in my New York City lifestyle, wine lifestyle. People become obsessed with this stuff because there are so many tiny differences that you could spend a lifetime or two investigating all those differences. You could also spend many life savings investigating those differences. But nonetheless, it makes it really exciting. It makes it tremendously, I don't know, it's like an adventure every time that you open the bottle, because you don't quite know what's going to happen. You know it's going to be Pinot Noir if it's red for the most part, but you don't know the exact inflection of that Pinot Noir. Is it going to be kind of more barnyardy and kind of sauvage, savage? Is it going to be really pure, crunchy red fruit? Is it going to be aged? And so it's autumnal and a little bit forest floor. Could be all those things combined. And that's the allure of Burgundy. That's what keeps people so intrigued. Before I keep going on that note, I'm going to show you a few different images. I have a good question that is French or Italian wine that we would compare to Albarino, because we're still kind of close there. So I want to answer this before I go too far. Yes. And I think, let me show you that on the map, and I'll make it as relevant as possible as we go to this, because it's a great question. So while we are in Burgundy, let me show you a few pictures of Burgundy, because when you go at the right time, it's wildly beautiful. This is really when the leaves are turning. At this point, all of the fruit would be picked. But the point of this picture is to kind of show you the rural landscape, and also just know that this is a place where vines surround the town. I mean, the vines are the town. This is all you see for the most part. You'll see tiny pockets of civilization, as you see in the background of this picture, but vines reign supreme. Vines are the reason why we know about Burgundy. And so this is the sort of the blood source of this place. Without these vines, without the possibility of making this grand juice, Burgundy would be a mere blip on the map. No one would pay much attention. But because they found early on, centuries ago, really millennia ago, they found early on that there was a possibility of making really exciting wine here, and they kept up with it. So most of the reason why we drink Burgundy is because the church owned a lot of this land. And because of the monks working in the vineyards studiously, recording everything that they observed, and keeping great records, that was eventually passed on to winemakers and families who absorbed this land. And when they took on those records, they understood, like, oh, this part of the vineyard happens to do well every single year. That's interesting. This part of the vineyard, less well, but it's a little bit easier drinking in its youth, so on and so forth. So after all of those sort of archives are put together today, we have quite a bit of information showing us what should be the best in Burgundy and what should be decent or above average, and then what should be stuff that you can drink on the everyday basis, which might not be as expensive, might not be as necessarily life changing, but still pretty good nonetheless. So that question of what would be similar to Albarino in a French context, we would go to Chablis, which is the very top of Burgundy, known primarily for making live mineral kind of thirst quenching. Also, a lot of oyster shells in the soil in Chablis, like actual. You could look at the soil composition and find oyster shell imprints. Of course, these are millions and millions and millions of years old, but that exists. And so that's where you also get that salty marine-like influence. Obviously, the ocean is not close to where I pointed in the middle of France or near the middle, but you still have that possibility. So Chablis is your Albarino in France, for sure. And Chablis is really just white wine, so we don't have it on the table tonight. But it is a place you should investigate if you liked that Albarino, because there's a lot of great stuff happening there. And because it's so disconnected, it has to be in this upper left-hand corner, but it's really like an hour away from the rest of Burgundy. It's kind of its own place unto itself. And it's really just Chardonnay that thrives there. You see on your label, you'll see Le Doigt right here. And Le Doigt is just off the beaten path. And this is important because when you're buying wine on your own, you'll find quickly, especially if you like Burgundy or if you're interested in Burgundy, Burgundy's prices can kind of start in a place that don't make you too queasy to a place that get exponentially difficult very fast. Burgundy is the darling child of the wine world today, far more than Bordeaux. It actually replaced Bordeaux in terms of its popularity. Though, if there's Bordeaux lovers, I like Bordeaux too. It's just not as popular as Burgundy. And so all eyes are on Burgundy. Everyone wants a piece of that relatively small pie. And so the prices are up because the demand is very high. In addition to that, like many old world places, there is no real irrigation. The sprinklers don't pop up after they've had a drought for 20, 30 days near harvest. Does not happen. So only Mother Nature dictates each vintage, which is kind of part of this terroir idea, this idea that only the earth, only the natural factors influence the wine. And so you could have a great vintage, you could have a not so great vintage. And that not so great vintage might mean the erratic weather patterns, which are more frequent, took out a part of your vineyard because of frost, because the temperatures went high, low. They freaked out the vine, and the vine just said, nope, I'm done. And so those problems really affect the overall yield. That makes the prices go up on everything that is made, and the demand is then even higher because there's even less wine to go around. So this is a difficult place. One reason why I bring a village like Le Doigt, which is again off the beaten path, is that it is right next to world-class wine, like wine that can go 10, 15, 20K a bottle relatively easily, right next to it. But in the past has not been quite ripe enough to get on the scales that everyone really appreciates, to get on that kind of elitist upper level. Now that the overall temperatures are rising, you have a place like Le Doigt doing really well, simply because it has that perfect exposition to the sun. All the energy hits these vines in the right way. Suddenly you have a near perfect combination for some excellent wine. So Le Doigt, right next to the hill of Corton-Charlemagne, or the hill of Corton, where a lot of crazy wine is sold and made, you have this place called Le Doigt. And so you want to look and at least know about some of these names that are just off the beaten path, especially in a popular place like Burgundy, because you can sneak in, grab some really fine wine for a fraction of the price. And it might not have the exact name like Chambolle-Musigny or Vosne Romanée, because those will fetch pretty high prices generally, but you can be right next to them and drink really well. And all those other places are great too. I'm just giving you the tips on what to look for. And so if you were in a restaurant environment, you would be asking for the sommelier or wine team. You would say, hey, you know what? I'm really interested in Burgundy, but I kind of want to adventure into some of these off the beaten path or just below the radar villages that people might not know as much about. That's a crazy question to a sommelier, because immediately they're like, cool, this person wants to play ball and they know what they're talking about. And fake it till you make until you make it is a fair slogan in wine. It was what I had to do. And so saying something like that can put you in a really good situation if you're looking for that wine experience. Take a minute with this nose, though, if you haven't. There should be a lot that happens. And when I say that, I also mean that in a way that's not necessarily overt. Like, this doesn't jump out of the glass like, let's say, a Napa cab. It just doesn't. It's not built that way. Napa has a lot hotter temperatures. It has a winemaking history that accentuates other things than just the earthy or the sauvage, that savage, mineralistic character. So Burgundy does make a wine that's a little bit more reserved. You have to use your head a little bit to kind of understand what's going on. But the more you do this, the more this wine swirls, the more it unfurls, and the more things happen with the aromatics and with the palate. We have a little bit of age on this wine too. Burgundy's really fun with age, because as it gets older, you see some of those more what we call like secondary characteristics. Those other things happen that, you know, it was just fruity when it was young, but now it's becoming more complicated. It's becoming more profound. It's gaining sort of this like wisdom, like a human being does. That's what Burgundy does when it ages. And so we brought a wine with around 5 years age to the table. And that's pretty awesome to be able to experience, but know that this wine could age for another 15 years, in my opinion, easily, which is a sign of how quality the winemaking is. Think about if you like this wine, though, and why you like it. If I would want this wine, the question is, how old should this Burgundy, I guess, should or does this Burgundy need to be? I mean, there's definitely no, in my opinion, no need. I've drank plenty of 2020 red Burgundies and they've been enjoyable. What is like the perfect window? Of course, we always look for the ideal window. The ideal window for Burgundy, in my opinion, is like this 10 to 15 year range. I like that range a lot. The wine still shows signs of freshness. However, it's also showing, you know, where it's going in a really interesting way. Know that, you know, you can drink wine that you've held too long. That's a possibility. And sometimes there's, you know, a flaw with the wine that's out of your control. If a wine is corked, not your fault. Also not whoever sold it to you's fault. It's just something that exists in the cork. It's a bacteria that takes over the wine. And you don't know that until you open the bottle. But yes, in a perfect world, 10 to 15 years. In this world that's less perfect, I always settle for 5 to 7 is lovely. I'm happy at 5 to 7, but 10, 15 is pretty strong. Great question. For everyone else, what do you like about this wine? I mean, it's delicate but powerful. I mean, you can see that 2018, which is a pretty big vintage, you know, it is very sunny vintage. It, for the most part, was good to a lot of winemakers in terms of relative volume. It was tricky for many also. It was one of the first hot years. Now they're all kind of hot years, but one of the first hot years that people really had to understand what balance means, when to pick the grapes. Those are all not easy questions, and there's no real right or wrong answer. So 2018s weren't the easiest for every producer. But for reds, they're generally much better than white wines. And they have a lot of kind of oomph behind them. And so it is sometimes a powerful Pinot, despite it still having all of these delicate notes to it. I'm reading that this is 14% alcohol, which is very much the norm in Burgundy today. It used to be closer to 13, so about a degree higher today. but this is exactly what I would expect. And I like this wine a lot. When you're looking at an old world label, you'll always see the village often. And when we go to our Barolo, we'll also see it there. You'll see the village, you'll see the producer. Sometimes you'll see a vineyard, like the actual vineyard name that it comes from, the individual vineyard. And then you'll see that actual year of harvest. So the three things you're basically looking for. But a really good thing to look for in a retail store is this back label. And if you have our New York wines, then this was imported by Rosenthal, and Rosenthal is a phenomenal portfolio. You can almost always go into a wine shop, flip the wine bottle, turn it over, just read the back label. If it says Rosenthal like this, good to go. It's one of those portfolios that doesn't really miss. Makes a lot of great wine, no matter where it comes from. It's just a classic, solid choice. So this is a good sign. But if Burgundy's not your vibe, which it doesn't have to be, you'll definitely be into the Barolo. And I want you to pour that, because after the Barolo, and after I talk about it briefly, we're going to go into the wine list. But as you're doing that, take a look at what I actually mean when I say terroir, because it's kind of hard to imagine when you just think about dirt. You know, you go to a vineyard and maybe the winemaker or the cellar master is taking you through this tour, and maybe they keep pointing at the ground and you're like, cool, like there's dirt down there, don't really care. What they're trying to help you understand, and it's never easy to understand it if you don't have a picture like this, is actually what's really, really beneath those vines. Not this little topsoil, which you see right here. See this kind of like, what is that? I guess that's like 6 inches, maybe a little bit more of topsoil. And now this is the real stuff. Look at all these vines digging through all of this rock, all this this almost looks like granite here into limestone, or maybe kind of like schist down here. All of this rocky material, these vines have to dig through, and they're digging through this because they're looking for water. So if a vine is overfed with water, like it lives this kind of lavish and lazy life because it's given all its nutrients and it doesn't have to move much, it's not going to create that interesting of wine, because these vines aren't digging deep. They're only going to they're going to spread horizontally at the top. They go, just horizontal to the topsoil. Because these vines are looking for water and nutrients to survive, they dig even deeper. And so as they dig deeper into that real composition, that bedrock, that is what makes a wine interesting. When it's in that stuff, that's what's being sort of translated into the glass in one way or another. Again, the science isn't A to B in this clear-cut way, but that's what the winemakers are aiming to do. This is the perfect scenario. If a vineyard's growing like a vine system, a root system is growing like this. It's kind of cool to see it this way, but this is what the best vineyards in the world, this is what a cross section would look like. And it's not just the top stuff. This is a great question. And hello, Debbie. Given climate change, do you concur that old vine stock? All right, so this is going to be for the real wine lovers in the room. Given climate change, do you concur that old vine stock is helping manage the change? Great question. So what this question, I'm going to translate this a little bit. Old vines are kind of like people. Old vines are a decision of the winemaker, of the estate, to have on premises because they often are a little bit more resilient over time. Old vines can be a lot of things. Some people like to call their old vines 50 to 60 years. Some people like to call their old vines 90 plus years. There's a bit of a gray zone there, but the older a vine gets, by and large, if it's being taken care of properly, the more resilient it's going to be to a lot of different things, including different weather patterns. It's going to have that protection system, that protective system, to be able to fight through some of the things the younger vines can't. Older vines don't produce as much. Just as we grow older, we might not be able to play as much as we used to be able to. But they are able to kind of to get through some of those more difficult, complicated situations, like a weather pattern coming through, like the weather on average getting higher and higher. So do I think that's going to help a lot? Yes, I do. Is that the trick to get through it? It's not, because it just doesn't produce enough grapes. Estates still need that younger, kind of average 30-year old vine to make as much wine as they do. They can't just, for the most part, stick with the old vines. But yes, I think that is one way that could really help through some of those tricky vintages. Lean on the labels that say old vines. And in fact, our Ladois says Via Vin, which is old vines. So the wine that's in your glass is actually an example of what we were talking about. Great question. So pour that Barolo in the meantime, and let me show you what this place looks like, because it is one of my favorite, almost sort of cinematic in its beauty. This is Piedmont, and I'll show the map in just a second, but I mean, just look at that. It is a place that has this alpine presence, not necessarily right at its doorstep, but it is there in the north. So as you pour this wine, you're going to see a wine that is not very dark. Might be surprising to you that it's Barolo, but this is what a lot of Barolo looks like. Not very dark, because we are so north. And then look at this. I mean, look at its disposition, its natural disposition. It has these mountains here. It has obviously the possibility for cooler temperatures, because that weather there, that weather is going to affect it, right? Those mountains are going to block some potentially bad weather, but they're also going to create some other weather too. And then you have a vineyard, rolling, undulating hills, and all of the vineyards are essentially located on these hills, positioned seemingly perfectly. And so all of those things combine together to make this sort of out of this world ideal situation for grape growing, for making wine. You want a vineyard that's on this hillside. That's exactly what you want, because when the weather does happen, you have the possibility of drainage. If it gets too wet one year, you have the possibility of these vines having to fight a little bit to dig deeper, because they're not at the very bottom of a hill where all the nutrients generally are. So you have this kind of delicate but really interesting and exciting situation for making wine here. And this is Piedmont. So at the top of Italy, you have wines that are influenced by many cultures, but by and large, they are known as some of Italy's finest wines. So we're all the way up here in Piedmont. What I love about this map, though, is look at how many colors there are. Each one of these colors signifies a wine location, destination, locale, a wine region. And every single one of these regions generally has its own grapes, often indigenous to that region. It would take a few dissertations to really map this all out and understand this place. It is so vast. It is so diverse. And that's what always takes me away when I open an Italian bottle of wine, because you almost don't know what's going to happen. You kind of have an idea based upon the region, but there's so many possibilities. This is what creates Italy forever. The intrigue behind it. It will always be vastly interesting because of this. But we are all the way up here in Piedmont, where Barolo and Barbaresco are made almost exclusively, but there's some other grapes there too. A big common misconception is that Barolo is better than Barbaresco. This is not true. In this map, this is just zooming in on Piedmont. You can see how close they are. Barolo's here in this darker kind of magenta. Barbaresco is here in this, it's kind of like a kidney bean color and shape. They're very close to each other. They have the same grapes. Nebbiolo is the same for both. Barbaresco doesn't age quite as long in barrel and or in bottle. Barolo is always longer. Barbaresco has soils that are a little bit sandier that yield and create more perfumey wines. And Barolo the opposite, a little bit more structured, a little bit more mineral. They're pretty much the same. If you were to blind taste them, it would be very difficult to tell with consistent accuracy which is which. You have the glasses right next to each other. Someone mixes them up. It's going to be hard. So always give Barbaresco a chance if you've heard otherwise. But this is a very good example of what Barolo should be. And I love not only the color, which is this like blood orange sort of, or at least orange brick is what we call it, color, if you put it against a white background. It's very light and translucent, even more than the Pinot Noir. But watch the tannins. Watch that grippy sensation. Not expecting it, hits you every time. That's an Italian signature to have a little bit of that oomph. But it is a very much a Piedmont or Barolo signature to have that tannin be front and center. And with food, you have a really good combination with that tannin. Great question. This is, what words would we tell the sommelier to get something similar to Barolo? So first and foremost, tell them that you want to drink wine that's similar to Barolo. Always a great way to start that conversation, because that gives context, it gives a reference point, a benchmark. Past that, you want a wine that does have structure, because this wine does have structure, but isn't just about fruit, because the leading descriptors here are generally closer to like black cherry, tar, and leather. All on paper probably don't sound like a great mixture, but that's what makes a wine interesting, because all of these things come together, probably a little menthol in there too. You want a wine that's earthy, like a Barolo, has some nice structure, and doesn't lean so hard on its fruit. Whereas a wine like Cabernet, for most places in the world, is going to be different. It's going to be plush, decadent, opulent. Fruit is going to be the star of that show. Fruit is not the star of this show. It is much more about the earth. And you could even say this fancy phrase or word, compound word, terroir driven. This is a terroir driven wine because you really taste Barolo. You don't really taste Nebbiolo. In fact, Nebbiolo is not on your label. You taste Barolo. You taste this specific place in the world that is called Barolo, and it just happens to grow Nebbiolo. But this is Barolo in the glass, and that's the identity they want to show you. So this, I like this question too, because this is a great way of understanding how to get what you want. I generally drink Barolo. Should I maybe venture out into the world tonight and try somewhere else that might be similar to Barolo? That's a great question. And I could take you to a lot of different places. So yes, use that language, lean on what you know, and take pictures of these bottles. These, if you like them too, are great ways of keeping information on hand. Thank you for that. All right, let's take a look at a wine list. Now that you have been prepped to know what to look for, I have a massive wine list in front of you, and obviously even an hour or 2 or 3 hours wouldn't be enough to dissect this, but I did this on purpose. So this is the Modern's wine list. The Modern is connected to MoMA in New York City. Many of you maybe have at least passed by it if you haven't been to MoMA, or maybe if you've been here before. Pre-COVID, this was one of the finest wine lists in the world, and unfortunately, COVID messed up a lot of things for a lot of wine lists because people had to sell their wine. They had to get through and make ends meet. But obviously, they still have 176 pages of wine, so they're not doing so bad. What I like about this, though, is it illustrates one of my main points very well. So this is the second page, so the table of contents. And oftentimes when I'm sitting down with a non-wine drinker and they see a wine list like this presented to me, their eyes roll because they know I'm going to be immersed in this for longer than is appropriate. That being said, I have a few tricks these days. So when you're presented with a wine list like this, your first reaction might be to freak out, which is totally fair. But what I suggest you doing is to take a deep breath and understand exactly what you want. Not just in life, what you want from this wine list and what you want from wine for that evening in general. Do you want to celebrate? Is this going to be a wild bottle of wine tonight for either a business transaction, a special moment in your friend's family life, your own life? Or is this something that's a little bit more casual? Is this something that, you might have an eye on, like, this is kind of what I want to spend, not much more than that? So two different worlds. When we look at a list like this, what I see immediately is that, and just looking casually on this, is that there's a few places that this wine list really focuses on. And you can see that in these little subheaders, right? So if I were to look at, going from white wines of the United States, I see, okay, there's like 2 pages on that. Not a big focus. White wines of the Southern Hemisphere, about 3 pages, again, out of 176 pages, not a big focus. Okay, well, France looks like it's pretty big. What is that? 37 to 69. Cool. So that's nearly 30 pages of white wine of France. They probably focus on France. White wines of Italy, 1 page. White wines of Spain, 1 page. This is the pattern I'm looking for. Why I'm looking for this pattern? Clearly, they focus on French wine. That means they're likely pricing these French bottles at competitive prices, or, pricing that's gonna twist your arm a little bit, because they know the audience is coming for these wines. A wine drinker knows where he, she, or they is going for the night. They've already done research in New York City. They know exactly what's going to be presented. And so when you have a wine list like this, the sommeliers, the people creating it, know that people are coming, specific people are coming for this French list. And you can price that pretty heavy because the demand is there. The demand might not be so high for white wines of Italy or white wines of Spain. Only 1 page. White wines of Portugal, 1 page, etc. So we go back to these 2 perspectives, these 2 worlds. Am I about to ball out on a bottle of wine that is going to be crazy, especially if I'm not paying for it, even better? Or am I going to be a little bit more pragmatic and rational and go for a great bottle of wine that might not, really make me suffer financially? If I'm going for the latter, these are the pages. These 1-pagers are the ones I'm looking at, because I know the demand is not as high in Spain, simply because I can see it on the list. The focus is simply not as crazy there. Here is their white wines of Spain area. You have all Galicia. As we said, this is a place that is really an exciting place. You have an Albarino here for under $100. You have a Rioja down here for under $100, and then you have like 100 to low 200s here. But it's all succinct. It's all pretty easy to read, and I can figure out where I want to be here. If I want to kind of investigate into Portugal, bam, kind of same price range, and I can feel comfortable with some of these prices and not, like worry too much. I have a plan, if nothing else. Of course, you're going to see some wines that are those kind of geeky wines that can get pretty expensive. But that was a quick way of understanding this list. If we were to get stuck in all the Burgundy, which was, I won't go all the way, scroll through every single thing. If we're going to get stuck in all the Burgundy, you have to look through every single page of this list. That would make the people at your table pretty uncomfortable. They would be waiting around, staring at the walls for a while, because that would take a long time. So wherever you want to go, make that decision ahead of time. Now, when you found a wine that maybe you're comfortable with, let's say, the Jura is something you've wanted to try. You see this wine that seems like a good price, this $100, let's say Savian. When the sommelier comes over, when the wine team comes over, the best way to communicate pricing about a wine, especially if you're not like in company to say it aloud or whatever, simply point to the wine list. I'm looking for a wine that tastes like this around this price point. What do you have? Great. Even if that price point's really, $500, $600, $700, $1,000, whatever. That is a really good way to communicate to the sommelier or to someone efficiently. I can't tell you how many times I was on the floor and it'd be this song and dance about like, all right, so what do you really want? You're not telling me anything and you're like a fortress. I know you want wine. I just have no idea what that is or what that price might look like. So don't play those games, because they're hard games to play for either side. So always be forthright about what you want. And that makes everyone's life easier. And you can do that subtly, or you can, say it aloud too, whatever, but make that known, because it makes it, decisive answers can happen out of that equation more so than they could otherwise. Let me look at this question. This is a great question too, from the last wine we were drinking. So the Barolo that is likely in everyone's glass. How are Barolo and Brunello, which sound pretty similar to each other, different from each other? They are from different parts of Italy, is the easiest way to answer that. On a wine list, Barolo and Brunello might fetch pretty similar prices. And really, these are the top two wines of Italy would be Brunello and or at least like, Tuscany in general. So we can include Super Tuscans in there, but Super Tuscan, Brunello, and Barolo Barbaresco, those are the areas that people really want. Brunello is going to come from Tuscany. So this red area where you'll see Florence, around Florence, basically, is where these wines are going to come from. They're lower, as you can see on this map. Therefore, they're going to be more fruit. Aging laws are pretty similar, though aging techniques are going to vary pretty widely, but they have to be aged for a certain amount of time, especially if it's a Brunello Reserva. Just like if we have a Barolo Reserva, you have extended amount of times. So these are by law, they have to abide by these rules, have to, can't get around it. They'll be taxed, they'll be shut down if they are found cheating. So that's kind of a qualitative mark for you to look for from both of these regions. But these are the places to look for if you are trying to try the best of Italy. It's really, Tuscany, Brunello, Super Tuscans, and then Barolo Barbaresco. How are they going to taste different? Brunello is generally going to be darker than this. Super Tuscan for sure, darker than this. And I would say the Barolo and Barbaresco are more earth forward, especially because they're higher up on the map where cooler temperatures are, where Tuscany is going to have a lot more of that juiciness. It'll still be earthy, but you might find a lot of that kind of overt cherry right in the front, maybe a little bit of that green herbaceousness, and less of this kind of closer to kind of underground terroir soil driven wine that's in your glass. Great question. So these wine lists can obviously vary from place to place. They will always vary. What you should keep in mind is that never buy a wine by the glass if you are in good company. That is to say, if you're willing to share a wine with someone in your group, someone in the crowd, then look at that bottle list, because the by the glass list is always the one that's marked up the highest. That's where a lot of the keeping the lights on at the restaurant, that's where it happens. So where a bottle list, you might see a markup of × 3 the wholesale price. So the bottle costs $50. You put it on the list for like $150. On the by the glass list, oftentimes, especially in a place like New York, let's say, the bottle costs $10 or $12, and the by the glass list is like $13 or $14. Do you see how high that jumped? By the glass, just one glass of that wine costs more than the actual bottle. So be wary of that. I want to thank you and stick to this 1 hour like we pledged. I hope I packed in as much information as I could. I hope you know a little bit more about going out into the world on your own. But stay in touch with me if you'd like to. I have a website, Vin-Decision.com. Most importantly, enjoy these wines tonight, and I hope to see you again in the future. I'm going to hand it back to the gentleman, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon. That was amazing. And as usual, I really learned a lot, and your presentation was excellent. I love how you have pictures of all the vineyards as we're drinking those wines. And every time I drink Albarino, I think back to the first date with my wife. We had met at a Villanova alumni event, and our first date was a couple of weeks later at a Spanish restaurant in downtown Philadelphia. She told her roommate that our date wouldn't last long and she'd be back home in 30 minutes or less. But when she arrived at the restaurant, I ordered a whole bottle of Albarino, and we ended up spending 4 hours together that night. And now, many years later, we have Jake and Emma, and I still have the wine cork from our first date in my home office sitting on my desk. So thank you for sharing the Albarino with us tonight. It brought back a lot of good memories. And Thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed spending this time with you and will continue to remain focused every day on reaching your goals. We have an amazing calendar of special events planned for 2024 and hope that you can join us for many of those as well. Good night, everyone. We hope that you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.